Thank you all very much. About 2 months ago, I was asked a question. I had a 2.5 hour Senate hearing on the Senate Help Committee chaired by Senator Lamar Alexander. And Senator Tammy Baldwin sits on Help, and she chimed in after listening to some of the things I was saying. And she said, I know you don't know anything about Wisconsin, but we're going through a similar circumstance. And she tried to explain it to me, and I let her finish. And I said, yes, I do know that my daughter's tuition is going to ultimately end up going up at Wisconsin. And, and because of the same circumstances, same scenarios. Let me, all of this is related to the work, the fight. It seems like the fight we had here is way behind us, even though it ended on June 11th. And the new fight is in Washington with Senate help on a very similar, these are very related issues. But I'll start by saying that we ended up solving it by the cuts with 90 seconds left before the legislative session ended. That's when the electricity is shut off on all the voting booths or the buttons, and we had to get about 12 acts passed in the last 20 minutes. The last one getting passed with 90 seconds left, basically keeping us whole. That's kind of how Louisiana works and operates. But I'll take us back a little bit. This all started in January, but on the heels of 5 to 6 straight budget cut years, where half of the higher education budget had been reduced significantly, had been basically cut by over 50%. The governor certainly has ambitions running for president. The one person that you didn't mention that probably should be included with both our governors in the introduction is a lobbyist named Grover Norquist. We had to deal with Grover's gang out in Central Valley of California as well. The nice thing at the end of this, there was such a disdain for Grover Norquist that I don't think anybody else is going to sign any more pledges for a while, which is a good outcome at the end. The way to explain what happened in the budget fight here is you have to put everything in football terms. And we went into the game, when the game was started, we were 42-point underdogs. And we ended up winning the game 2-0. And by that, I mean, we wrestled our own fee autonomy away from the state legislature, who was in control of both tuition and fee autonomy. The trade-off was we get the fees, they keep the tuition control, of which you need a 2/3 vote to raise it here, which is virtually impossible. 2/3 vote is the type of vote California needed in my 9 years out there to pass a budget. That's why we never had a budget. If you want to shut something down, base it on a 2/3 vote. So we went into this. The governor released his budget in January of last year. I'm friends with the governor. He's moving in next door to me as a neighbor. I warned the governor that unlike the previous big budget years where we've had cuts and the recession, that we're going to get all kinds of national notoriety for this proposed budget. And I said that the only 2 states that are going to be heard about throughout the course of this year will be Louisiana and Wisconsin. So all eyes and ears and reporters are going to be calling us. This will have national significance, as it absolutely did, because many of the other states were either in recovery mode. When we called North Dakota to find out if they were going to have a bad budget cycle because of the oil crisis issue, the gas price or the decreases in the oil barrel a gallon, the president of North Dakota said, no, we're not, because we set aside $3 billion knowing that this oil boom would end and the money would stop rolling in. So we were anticipating hearing probably from North Dakota, but North Dakota properly managed their budget and set aside money for when this did happen, they didn't have to deal with it. So we roll out of January with an 82% reduction on what we currently what we're getting from the state. That would have placed our budget, as our entire state budget would have dropped to 4.9% from the state for LSU. So we would have gone from roughly about 17% to 4.9% overnight. Well, it was such these numbers were so significant that I even told the newspaper that these numbers are cartoon-like in their magnitude. And we quickly made it around to our legislative leaders, and they thought this was, after everything we've gone through, that higher ed needed to be protected this time, but nobody knew how to get there because we couldn't raise a tax because of Grover Norquist. If we did raise a tax, we had to have it offset by cuts in something else. It had to be a zero-sum game. And all kinds of schemes surfaced, all kinds of tax proposals surfaced. As the legislative session opened in late April, we were told that higher ed would be protected the first week of the legislative session because this is just too damaging for us. Well, it went down to the last 90 seconds on June 11th. So we had to live in limbo. We had to not cancel our over 100 faculty searches that were underway. We had to make sure that our students, we didn't cut 40% of the classes that would have had to been reduced to even get close to this type of number. But when the press started talking about it, we started putting it into real terms. And my theory is from years of experience with legislatures, was that we're going to tell the truth about what does this 82% reduction really mean. And I'm not going to have them come up to me on June 12th and say, well, if you would have told us that, we would have voted differently. You should have told us that was going to be the consequence. So we started talking about the consequences. No more faculty hires, a reduction of student classes by 40 to 50%, a reduction in our parish-based ag centers. And this really was a tremendous ally for us because we're in every parish or every county of the state through our ag center. And we have a rural delegation in this state that's very powerful. And quite honestly, they care about two things LSU does. They care about the ag centers and they care about Saturday football. And that's a very powerful lobbying body. So we got with our ag center folks and said, you tell us which 50% of our ag centers and which parishes we're not going to serve. That got their attention because they thought, every one of them thought they were on the chopping block, of which they would have been if these cuts had gone through. The governor wanted this problem solved, but more importantly, he wanted to make sure Grover Norquist checked the boxes to get us there. The legislative leaders, and we're in a red right state, but they were very sympathetic to the fact that higher ed were well below what people charge in tuition. Our students were third lowest in student indebtedness in the country, and our graduates do very, very well. They starting salaries and mid-career earnings are among the best in the country, of which, if you want to ask later about the college scorecard that we released, I'll share the development of that with you because we were in the White House just the other day in the West Wing, right as that was being released, so we could join in on the fun to see what happened when private higher education got nervous and got mad about it. But those are the things that our legislators knew that we're doing the best we can, especially having 50% of our budget reduced. Now, if we hadn't had those previous years where 50% of our budget was reduced, we might have faced a different dynamic with our legislature. That dynamic being, well, higher ed is fat, higher ed is bloated, too much administration, the old arguments that we've heard for so many years. But having gone through massive reductions and loss of 222 net faculty from our faculty, the loss of federal funds that were starting to show the signs of the loss of those faculty, we had a lot of allies on the Hill in the Capitol that we started working every day on. And I'll have to point out, this was an everyday issue for 6 months. And when the legislative session stopped on June 11th, I told everyone I forgot what the rest of my job was because it was all about saving this budget somehow. So what happened, we have about a $16 billion budget. Part of the recession was to give away tax credits to encourage businesses to move to Louisiana. And then we woke up prior to this session, and we've given away $7 billion worth of tax credits. All higher education, all we wanted was one, to keep higher education whole, $1 billion, but we were giving away $7 billion to to oil and gas, to companies, to IBM, to my favorite of the movie. It was all that we were giving away to the movie industry. So the movie industry can come to Louisiana and film more shows about vampires and werewolves. And my favorite is the Zombies versus Navy SEALs movie, which just opened. That was filmed here in the Capitol. Some people think that has a lot to do with building economic development for the state. I think it helps at Halloween, but not much else in terms of tourism. So we'd given away the shop. We'd given away half of the state budget to local governments, to companies for utilities just to move, stay, whatever they demanded they got. Well, part of the challenge was, which of these do you hit? Which of these tax credits do you reduce? And everybody was for cutting the tax credits until their ox got gored, which meant the business interests, the chambers of commerce, pitted against higher education, which that's what this budget did. It pitted higher education against business tax credits and industry tax credits in the state. We didn't want to be in that position because the year before we put together a very good budget with business and industry to produce more graduates that they needed in STEM and engineering and all the business and industry grad needs that we were going to meet through the year before. But now we were pitted head to head. Well, as this went on, most people came to realize that everybody probably needs to pay their fair share, and higher ed has taken its fair share. So first week went by, second week went by, all these battles were going on. And at the end of the day, we were able to increase some taxes on things like cigarettes and some sin taxes, offsetting those with some cuts in some other areas so Grover Norquist could check the box. And then it came down to what we call the SAVE tuition credit. So this is how the SAVE tuition tax credit works. This was $450 million of our $700 million reduction. It was the last major obstacle for us to get passed in the state legislature. What we essentially did is create a SAVE tax credit, and then we had to get it approved by Grover Norquist. Grover Norquist checked the box, so we had to move forth with a plan that nobody thought was a good idea, and nobody really could explain for the first 3 weeks. So on the last day, the SAVE tax credit was passed, 59 votes. We had 9 more votes than we needed. And it works like this. Every student gets charged $1,222 more on their tuition bill, but they never see the bill. Their parents never see the bill. The bill actually comes in the form of a credit on the positive side of the ledger, so that we can not give higher education the cut that it was on the negative side of the ledger. So it is a tax credit that was created based on how many students we had, charging them $1,222 more that nobody ever saw, nobody ever felt, nobody ever knew existed. It never showed up, and nor has it ever shown up on the bill. But it was the offset on the positive side of the ledger to offset the negative cut. It was passed in the last 10 minutes, basically, of the state legislative session. Nobody's ever done this before. I tell students, they said, explain this to me. And I said, the only thing you need to know is that you were the hostage. You didn't get shot. You were released from the Iranian embassy on the last minute. And you guys did get the SAVE out of it. The SAVE for you is 45% of your courses. So it was even introduced by the bill's author like this. He said his name was Assembly Member Broadwater. Great, one of the best legislative speeches I've heard in a long, long time. He said, I'm introducing the SAVE tax credit bill to all of you. And he said, is it good public policy? No. Can I explain it fully? No. Would you teach our children to do this in school? No. Would you teach our students this in an economics class? No. And then he said, however, I'm voting for it, and I hope you will, because we've cut higher education far too much, and our students deserve better policy than this. And he told all the reasons why it was generated so Grover Norquist could check the box. And so at the end of the day, we were held whole down to the last 90 seconds of this fight. And I do feel like we were led down the steps of the Capitol, a bit like the hostages were let out of the U.S. Embassy in Tehran and on the last minute. But we're not out of the woods. And what that ultimately did, even though it at the time addressed a $1.6 billion deficit, only $400 million of that was created by oil and gas. The rest, we did this to ourselves. That still created, that we're looking at, is an $800 million hole that we have right now. And if that is a significant hole that we have a gubernatorial election coming up in a month. All four of our candidates have said a couple things. They've said they're not taking any pledges. They're not signing any pledges with anybody. And they're going to have a special session in January to address the $800 million hole. So what we essentially did is we wrestled away fee autonomy for ourselves to give us a little bit of flexibility, but we also bought us 6 months of time. We bought 6 months more without devastation. And we're going right back into it, probably at the end of January in a special session that will hopefully dededicate and take a lot of our funds that are dedicated, because we're one of the only few that's not dedicated in the state, and also address how many tax credit giveaways we have just given to anybody and everybody. Now, one other thing that I think, when I was explaining the severity of this budget reduction, that most people thought I was, until we hit this chord, this is what got national attention. I have 3 other campuses that are smaller, that are on the edge of financial exigency, always because of their very low enrollments. A cut like this would have meant that we would have had to start preparing, which we did, for financial exigency on the part of one of our 2 med schools, possibly both of them, shutting the only school of dentistry down in the state, closing 1 or 2 of our medical centers, and closing half of the ag centers in the state, and filing for what the papers termed, which I didn't deem it this, but they did, they called it academic bankruptcy. When we threw that one on the table, everybody sat up and took notice, because LSU is to Wisconsin like the University of Wisconsin is to Wisconsin. If LSU, we're at Georgia and Georgia Tech put together here. Everybody in the state follows this university, and they have allegiances to the university, this university. But if LSU has to file for financial exigency, what are the other 9 universities around us going to have to do? And they were very cautious about saying that, because they were more worried about their future enrollments than we were. Our students are going to come to us, and we still had 1,000 student increase in our enrollment this year. But we lost some out-of-state students, because when this hit the financial exigency and it became national, we did lose a number of our out-of-state students because they went other states, that they had other choices. But when we mentioned financial exigency, the Chronicle of Higher Ed wrote about it, the New York Times called about it. We even made it into Al Jazeera. And I'm serious. We had the Arab world, the Arab Spring, they were worried about us. And they were actually following this issue pretty closely. The reason they picked up on it was because Governor Jindal had just made a trip to London. And he talked about the Muslim zones that exist in Paris and around the area where police won't go. And so Al Jazeera started following Governor Jindal quite closely. And so when we claimed this, they put it out there. They put it out there. But that was really the term that got everybody's attention. And we were just being honest. Yeah, we'd have to file for financial exigency on behalf of 3 of our campuses, on behalf of our School of Dentistry. Basically wiping out programs, faculty positions, departments, all the above. And we would have had about half of the other 9 universities in the state do the same thing. And about 1/3 of the community colleges were going to have to do the same thing. It was the largest state budget reduction in the history of American higher education since we started following this stuff in 1961 at the Grapevine. So we had to tell it like it is. And Professor Stampin, that was your your man M.M. Chambers, who started all this. So that's the story in a nutshell. If we had federal leverage that I could use with our legislators, like we're working on, federal incentives, maintenance of effort provisions, which worked very well when we got them written into the stimulus package, this can help us in the future. So that's why we're working so hard to get federal leverage and to build a fund that has about $10 billion in it that then rewards states for maintaining their current spending levels for higher education. The beauty of the Tennessee free community college plan is not that the federal government is going to supply 75% of the cost to the student to make it free. But the beauty is in the back half of that. The beauty is that Tennessee can only do this and only play in this program if and only if Tennessee does not cut their measured in per student FTE funding, doesn't cut their higher ed budget for 2-year institutions and 4-year institutions. That's why you don't hear an outcry from the University of Tennessee or Memphis or Middle Tennessee State, is because their budgets were just secured and protected. If I had federal leverage like that said we're going to lose tens of millions of dollars or to not make community colleges affordable again for community colleges, I think it could work very well for us. We do it for highways, we do it for Medicaid, we do it for so many other things, but for some reason, the next generation of students and college students aren't worth federal interest and federal leverage and federal involvement. So that's kind of how these two things tie together. And does that leverage have an impact on Wisconsin? Yes, it does. Certainly would. And if you lost tens of millions of dollars from the federal government, then you'd have even greater leverage down the street, down State Street. And that's really the critical element. I think if we don't do something like that at the federal government level, if we do not use the next 50 years of the Higher Education Act to save public higher education, then we won't have public higher education. Right now, the trajectory for the state of Colorado is that kids in 2nd, 3rd, and 4th grade, by the time they get through their senior year in high school, Colorado will not spend a penny on public higher education. We're 2 years behind them. We're 2027. So the 20,000 kindergartners in this state will not have an LSU, will not have a public university to choose from, or an affordable university to choose from. We took the last 50 years and we more than saved private higher education in this country. We gave them a serious leg up on their per student spending. Their salaries now outpace ours when they were quite comparable 25 years ago. Now private higher education has won the last 50 years. We have made it so lucrative for private higher education that a whole new sector of private higher education has sprung up and is stealing 30% of the Pell Grants, which are the for-profit institutions that are in every industrial park in the United States. That sector alone serves 11% of the students, gets 30% of all Pell Grants, and has 47% of all the student loan defaults. And as I pointed out to Gene Block out in California, the chancellor at the university at UCLA, I said, Gene, do you know your accreditation goes alongside Stanford's? You get the same Pell Grant Long Beach State gets, the same Pell Grant UCLA gets, but you know who also gets the Pell Grant? The University of the United States of America. It's in an industrial park in Long Beach, California. Fast Track University, which was in Fort Lauderdale, that gets the same Pell Grant as a Wisconsin Badger does. Fast Track hired exotic dancers to be admissions officers and recruiters. Patton University in Oakland. Patton University gets the same Pell Grant that we get, the same Pell Grant that Wisconsin gets. Patton University, I had the opportunity to meet their president, their vice president for academic affairs, and their vice president for student affairs. They're all three sisters in the same family. And you can't make this up. We've got the Wild West of higher education now because we've made it so lucrative for private higher education. And they don't care if it's a grant or a loan dollar. It's a dollar. And now that 57 institutions charge over $60,000 a year, and that's just with no end in sight, they're living off loan dollars each and every year. That's the other side of the scorecard. We wanted a scorecard to tell parents what the outcomes were, to have a counterbalance to the U.S. News and World Report nonsense. that basically ranks institutions based on how many students you turn away, not how many you educate. Number one. Number two, 50% of their whole score is based on how much money you're able to spend on the fewest amount of students. I say it's the biggest inefficiency rating in America. So if you're a large public serving the public needs and the public good of your state, using the scale to build our economies like we are and you are, you increasingly fall right out of that ranking. That's why this scorecard is important, because it measures student indebtedness upon graduation. How does that compare with the state and national average? In many ways, they took what we did in the Cal State University system 7 years ago and made it available for parents, and they took it and turned it into the college scorecard that we have today. Student indebtedness, whether your graduation rate is a good one or a bad one. What are your starting salaries early years out up to 10 years out? How many of your graduates actually earn more than if they had never, than a high school graduate that never pursued college in the first place? And this is what sticks. Many for-profits get nailed on this one. There's a for-profit institution here in Baton Rouge where only 21% of their students are paying their federal loans back after 7 years, which means 80% of them are accruing, sitting there with no jobs, worthless piece of paper, accruing massive interest on their student loans. A bit like Corinthian College as it went out a few months ago. So the scorecard is designed, it really said, look, this is the Wild West, and we need a sheriff. We need somebody that assesses value, and the starting salaries tell us whether you have good jobs. And what you'll see is that the institutions that have low debt are very affordable and have high graduation rates and very strong earnings are the best, quote, values in America. That's a game changer for public higher education, because it's really aimed at putting a place like U.S. News and World Report on its heels and getting real information in the hands of students and parents. And when I was testifying, I had to bring it down a little bit to a couple of them. I said, you know, Senator Alexander, and he's a Tennessee Alexander, I'm a Kentucky one. So they're a different bunch down there. But Senator Alexander, we know more about the cars we buy. We have the blue book value of the cars we buy. People know all about the blue book. Then the colleges and universities that we invest our livelihood in, our careers in, our children's futures in for a lifetime. And so you can think of the college scorecard as a blue book, as a better blue book on assessing the value for parents and students. In talking with parents and students at orientation, I can tell you that this is the information they eat up like hotcakes. And up until now, they've said, where can we get it? Where can we get this information? Because it's being either kept from us or nobody's providing it on purpose in both. And that's what's happened. Private higher education, NICU, including ACE, have been fighting us every step of the way. And now they're getting a little concerned that they may not be worth $65,000 a year when they start looking at these outcomes. And now people can find out about it. So that's kind of where both of these come together. The last trick I'll share with you that was quite useful at times when I pulled it here in Louisiana on getting people to understand the budget. There were many people who did not understand what the loss of 40% of your classes really means. Losing faculty, what does that really mean? So the last plan I had, the sort of my ace in the deck was that I would bring this out. You see the S in the middle? Normally that S is the same size as the L or the U. And that S is 5% of what the L and the U, the size of the L and the U. I told them we were going to change our helmets next year. If they go through with this, that S is going to be that small or smaller, on its way to getting just ripped right off the helmet. So until I told some of them that, they finally started to understand that we have a serious problem. If he's willing to change the helmet, this is a much bigger issue than they ever imagined. So that's our story in a nutshell. And I look forward to your questions and anything that you can that we can share.